So we're going to start with kind of priming our brains a little bit for this STEAM idea. We're going to use a Padlet, which if you've never used a Padlet before, let me show you real quick how it works. In the bottom right-hand side, sorry, I got to take my glasses off, there's a little plus sign. You click the little plus sign, you'll be able to add your subject and then add some text. If you feel like you want to explore a little bit and put an image or a GIF in there, that's what these are for. But once you're ready, you just hit submit and it will pop right up. So we're going to use the prompt. What do you think, when you think of STEAM, what comes to mind? That's where we're going to start ourselves off. So if you want to start throwing some ideas into that Padlet, when you think of STEAM, the question is also on the Padlet right here. When you think of STEAM, what comes to mind? Oh, and Jeff, would you mind throwing that in the chat for me real quick? Just in case. I think everybody has it, but. Creativity, it's a good one. Inquiry, my favorite. Which we'll talk about inquiry today. Collaboration, problem solving, great. Integration is a great one. I always, we have a lot of discussions here on my team about STEAM, along with like the learning through technology teams like MLTI, and we talk a lot about capital letters and how sometimes you know a capital is it's driven by capital S, and then the T and the E and the A and the M are lowercase. But the goal being, if we can, integrate all the capital letters together so that it's truly STEAM. But that's not always the case. It's not a problem at all. Integrated, great. Teamwork, it's a good one. Karen, I'm going to put yours in there. Oh, sure. Great. Problem solving and teamwork. Love it. Actions-based subject matter integrates subjects. Oh, that's a good one too. These are some really great descriptions of STEAM. I love this. Hands-on experience. That's great. Engaging activities, technology in a wide variety of ways. Cool. Oh, come on in. Awesome. These are great. And actually, we're going to cover quite a few of these today. Process experimentation, expressing concepts. So that's a great one. In fact, we're actually going to talk about concepts today. These are really great. I really appreciate the integrated nature of this. I assume that's what brought you here in the first place. And that's kind of what our focus is going to be on, is how do we look at STEAM as all capital letters, like I just mentioned, and integrate it throughout the entire thing. So that's kind of the purpose of what we're going to be working in here today. So thank you all so much for that. Let me get this back up again. No, I don't want to share. I want to present. Present. Go. Okay, just 1 second. Let me get myself situated here. All right. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know it did that. All right. So, like I said before, STEAM, the goal is to integrate, absolutely. And it can be driven by one of the letters. So, for instance, I was a science teacher. I would argue that I taught in a STEAM kind of mindset about everything that we did. There was inquiry, there was integration, but it was definitely driven by my science curriculum. And then the rest of it was capitalized. Absolutely, we did engineering, we did art, we did math, we did technology. It was all part of it, but it was definitely driven by science. It might be driven by math, it might be driven by art. It really doesn't. It can be driven by a content if it needs to be. That's we all are. We all have content that we're responsible for in some way. So that may be the way we drive it. What we're going to look at today a little bit is how you can design, and we're going to look at examples of how you can design STEAM that is kind of like almost like content agnostic in a way, but that you can include content in there for whatever standards you're responsible for. But it also is important to remember that there are also lots of other things that aren't in STEAM, which is one of my favorite jokes about STEAM is that STEAM really is just school. If you do it right, it's just literacy, it's social studies, it's health, it's music, it's agriculture, it's PE. It's all of those things can be a part of this. But if we did that, then it would just be a bunch of like jargony letters that look like text message. So it would be relatively useless. But the idea is, even though the STEAM are the capital letters, that when you think about integration, we should consider PE, we should consider music, we can consider ag in the classroom, literacy, social studies, numeracy, all of those things that go along with that. All right, so we're going to start with this. I want you to kind of think about this idea for a minute about how what your orientation is towards STEAM. This comes from this book called Numeracy Across the Curriculum, and it's not meant to pigeonhole anybody. That's not really the idea. It's more designed to kind of set your mindset about where you fall in these kind of three ideas: a separatist, a theme maker, and an embedder. And all of them are fantastic. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of them. There's no judgment in any sort of way about any of these things. So don't feel like, oh, I'm a separatist and that makes me somehow wrong, or I'm an embedder and I'm somehow wrong. Like, it doesn't matter. It's really how you view this. That's the important part. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and define these, and then we're going to take a minute to figure out, think about where you fall on that, kind of where your orientation lies, because that's going to help us to kind of think about the rest of what we're going to be talking about as we go through. So a separatist recognizes STEAM's importance, absolutely, but thinks of it as a responsibility of the discipline teacher. The science teacher teaches STEAM. The math teacher, the technology teacher teaches STEAM. That's this separatist, and that's great. Like I said, that's the way I taught for a very long time, was in that separatist role where I was a science teacher, I taught STEAM. The math teacher did the math stuff, the social studies teacher did the social studies stuff, the English teacher did the English stuff, and I would integrate all of that stuff together. And that was, that was the way it was. It was the way my school was set up. So you could be a separatist, which is great. Could be a theme maker, where you recognize that there are themes between the disciplines, and you try to integrate as much as you can. So your theme could be something big, like weather, right? And you're looking at how are all the STEAM aspects of that connected. So you might be outside connecting data with microbits. You might be looking at data analysis in the numeracy piece. You might be engineering a rain catcher to be able to gauge water, how much rain you get in your area, right? Like, you could be thinking of it from a theme perspective, whereas we're integrating all of these things together, but but they're under an umbrella. We're here. No pun intended with the weather part either. All right, the last one is the embedder. So not only are you thinking like big ideas, but everybody's a STEAM teacher. ELA person, your math person, your art person, everybody has some sort of connection to STEAM in some way. So what I want you to do is just take a moment, or take a minute or two, and just think about where you land. What's your orientation when it comes to STEAM? And I'll stop talking for a minute so you can think. crazy how long wait time feels on Zoom? It always blows my mind because I work remotely. Jeff works remotely, so we have a lot of meetings through Teams or through Zoom or whatever, and it always shocks me how long wait time feels when you're on this instead of like in a classroom. It's the weirdest thing. But anyway, hopefully you've had a second to think about this. We're going to move on to the next piece, but keep your orientation in mind because we're going to use it again here in a little bit. So we're going to move on to looking at two ways to integrate, two big ideas on how to integrate STEAM together. These are absolutely by no means the only ways to do this, but in the amount of time that we had, I wanted to pick the two that seemed to make the most sense, that were the like kind of the most accessible to us in a classroom. So we're going to look at concepts and we're going to look at skills. We're going to start with concepts though. So before we go into this piece, though, I want to make sure that we all have a pretty good understanding of what a concept is. I, as a as a middle school teacher, would use that word quite often. I thought I knew what it meant, and then I dove a little bit deeper and realized that I had a very surface level understanding of concepts. So I just figured it would be important for us to all be on the same page. Let's start with what a concept is by definition. And my camera keeps zooming in and out all by itself, and it's just driving me a little bonkers. So luckily, hopefully you're not staring at me, you're staring at the slide deck. So first things first, let's define it as in terms of how you would like see it on a piece of paper. So it's first of all, it's a noun, and it's and that's helpful. It's usually one or two words, or it could be a short phrase sometimes. But the idea that's really important is that that word transfers across time, place, and situation. Okay, so it's systems, because systems isn't locked in time. We talk about systems, we can look at all sorts of different things. We can look at weather systems, we can look at technology systems like infrastructure stuff. You can look at systems in math in terms of like a matrices or something along those lines. Engineering is full of systems. Literacy is full of systems. Literally, a systems as a concept is gigantic, and it can transfer across time. It's not locked in place in any means, and it's not specific to a situation. Whereas like grass is, right? Grass is a thing, the noun, but it's grass. It's locked in time, it's locked in place, and it's locked in situation. So that would be, grass wouldn't be a concept, it's more of a topic. The other one that's interesting about concepts, and this was the part that always that really, when I started learning more about the neuroscience of this, how it really blew my mind how this works, is that concepts are really designed by or used by our brains as a way of organizing things. And if you think about it like a file folder, that file folder has the word systems in it at the top of it. And every single concept that connects to systems is in that file folder, whatever it might be, along with all the topics. So weather would be a topic inside of that systems folder. It's just an interesting way to think about it. But then what we would do as teachers is our goal, a big part of our goal is to connect concepts together to make them mesh, right? So like if I wanted to think about, inside of systems, inside my systems folder is the concept of patterns. Patterns also happens in music. So I can intentionally design, as a teacher, I can intentionally design opportunities for students to start making connections between folders based on concepts that they have in common. And it's a really cool idea, and there's a lot more to it than that. There's a very, very kind of like surface level understanding of it. But it is really amazing how our brains organize all these things. And for students, we have to scaffold that in a way that to help them make those connections. Even as adults, there are moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just made that connection. I never thought of that before in my entire life. And now this situation made me connect this to this. And it's just situational. As teachers, we can build those experiences for kids. And the STEAM is a perfect example of that, that helps connect those concepts across disciplines, but across other pieces that connect with their brains, other things that they have in their brains as well. So that's a concept. So for example, cause and effect is an example of a concept, whereas comparing and contrasting is a skill that you would use inside of that concept, or it's an idea inside of there. Patterns, concept, but graphing data is a specific skill that you would use to demonstrate patterns or as a part of patterns. Same with creativity, same with systems, right? Like those things are examples of concepts, but the non-examples are more topic or skill based. So that's the idea here. If you're interested in concepts, we have, we'll be working on releasing some asynchronous PD around concepts through our learning management system engine in the next few weeks. So there'll be a slide at the end of this slide that has all the hyperlinks to all of our stuff where you can find all of these other things. But if you're interested in doing a deep dive into concepts, we'll have one for you because it's fascinating. So let's take a look at some of the concepts that we could be working within. Now, I know I just said a minute ago, I'm going to go back. I know I just said a minute ago that comparing and contrasting is technically not a concept, but for the purposes of what we're going to do, we're going to call it a concept because and that's the kind of the deep dive of this too, is that there's macro concepts and micro concepts and like all this other stuff that go with it. So I just want to point that out because I do use that as a concept here as we go through. But this is an example of concepts that you could use across STEAM, right? That would be universal in terms of integration of all the letters, plus the literacy and the social studies and the humanities aspects of things, the phys ed, the health, the musics, all of that kind of stuff. There's systems, right? How parts connect to a whole, patterns, recognizing elements, right? That recur, trends, structures, things like that. Structure and function, how something is built, relates to what it can do. Cause and effect, scale, proportion, quantity, iteration, innovation, creativity, and models. Now, some of these you're going to recognize here in a moment, because some of these are also skills. And I did that on purpose. And when we get to skills, I'll talk more about that. But these are broad concepts that are easily transferable across all the letters and include all the rest of the letters if you were so inclined. But some of these are also very skill-based, which again is kind of a point to this. So let's look at the other way to integrate, which is skill-based. So when we think about skills, we're thinking about an integrated skill as a way of thinking or working that can be applied across disciplines, multiple disciplines. Now, that's it. I'm really leaning hard into this idea of integrated skills because, again, we're talking about integrated STEAM. A skill by itself can easily just be discipline focused, right? Like you can learn a skill, how to visualize data can absolutely be done in a math class or in a science class or in a technology class. Like you can do those in separate disciplines. The idea of an integrated skill is that we're now applying that skill to a unique situation, to an authentic situation that STEAM helps us bring out. So you might have spent some time learning about mean, median, and mode in math class, but when you get to your STEAM program, whatever you're doing for STEAM, whether it's science driving it or technology driving it or whatever, when you get to there, now you're going to apply that in some authentic way. And that's what makes it that integrated skill, right? We're moving it across disciplines. Because I don't know, I mean, if I had a nickel for every single time some kid came into my class and said, what do you mean we're going to write in science class? Right? Like what? You only write in one room in the building? That's the only room you ever write in? Like, what are you talking about? Of course you're going to write here. Or what do you mean we're going to talk about, why do I need to think about data? It's like, well, because we need to build evidence. Like you have to look at data to be able to have evidence. So like you need evidence. So you're going to need to think about what your central tendency is going to be and which one makes the most sense for your data set. And it's just that look of utter astonishment of like, what? Well, why would I do that? And I'm like, well, because what I'm trying to do, and I'm not telling the kids this, but what my goal as the science and STEAM person was to take those skills out of the context of what they were doing and use them in application. That was the idea. And that leads to deeper learning and meaning making, which is really what we're searching for with that kind of STEAM mindset. So let's take a look at the skills, because you'll notice that there are definitely some skills on here that were also concepts, because that's how concepts work sometimes. So inquiry, I know we talked about inquiry a bunch a minute ago, but inquiry and questioning is such a huge one. And we're going to spend some time talking about inquiry after our break here in a few minutes. But we're developing student questions, and that can look so many ways. And again, we have some PD on our website about student questioning, specific, and they actually have a kind of asynchronous/synchronous PD coming up starting October 21st on something called the question formulation technique, which is from the Right Question Institute. If you've never used it before, it is incredible. It really is an amazing way to get kids to ask really good questions. It's kind of a 4-step process. It starts with kind of a prompt, and then they ask lots of questions, and then you kind of whittle those questions down and define them, and then make them into one final question. And the QFT is, for short, is really, really, really incredible way of doing that. I used it in my classroom for a very long time, and my kids at first hated it because it takes a day or two to work through. But once we got good at it, we plowed through it really quick. But one of the things that I used it for was for guiding questions when it came to research. So that STEAM idea, right? We have kids doing inquiry. They may be going in different directions, based on whatever level of inquiry you're in your classroom, and they need some sort of question to guide them. And we as teachers can give them that questions, or as they get better at it, they can start developing those guiding questions to help them kind of focus their research a little bit more. And the QFT is a great way to do that. But inquiry and questioning absolutely go hand in hand with each other. Models and representation is part of like cross-cutting concepts from the NGSS, but it is very much a skill in terms of how do you design a model that will communicate what it is exactly that you're trying to do. And we're going to talk later about when we look at exemplars later. We're going to look at one that focuses on models and representations. Ideation and iteration is a big piece of design thinking, which is one of the instructional design models we're going to look at here in a little while. How do you ideate? How do you then take that idea, get it where you need it to be, and then work through that prototyping and iteration process until it gets where it needs to be? And that's a skill. And on top of that skill is the idea of accepting and receiving and accepting feedback, and failure. Not failure as in like I got an F on a test, but like the wheel fell off my little machine because I didn't glue it on well. Like real absolute failure. And then overcoming that and moving through. And that's one of the great things about the iterative process, is that allows kids to practice that. How to show evidence, how to show data, how to take data and turn it into evidence, because those two things are very different from each other. So how do you take all your raw data and then take out what you need and turn it, use it for evidence to support a claim? Just a big skill. Communication and expression, I don't need to tell you, that's an important one. And one of the ones that I thought was interesting that I wanted to add in here is the ethics and impact as a skill. And I would actually, I'm going to do my afternoon PD is about dispositions, which kind of dives a little bit deeper into this idea of how do you build a culture that supports something like ethics, right? So like how do you develop that in kids? Like we kind of think of them as being ethical from birth or not ethical from birth, but I would argue that's not entirely true. If you saw Wicked any time in your life, then you would know that Elphaba may not have been Elphaba if she hadn't had some sort of things impacting her life. Her ethics started off one way and were changed as time progressed, and that was situational. And I always say that because my daughter loves it and we watch it all the time, so it's like fresh in my mind. I know I listened to it this morning when I brought her to school. How do we develop situations for students where they can practice that ethics and understand it? And I agree. And robotics, absolutely. AI, absolutely. Right? Like, how do we ethically deal with these problems, and how do kids understand the impact that these things are having on our lives in some way? I mean, cell phones are a perfect example of the impact that some sort of technology is having on us. But how do we develop that with kids? How do we develop that opportunity and give the kids the opportunity to practice using that, the skills around ethics and understanding impact? So concepts and skills, or how we're going to look at our integration models for STEAM. But I want to take a minute here. I know I've scheduled a break in here. That went a lot quicker than I thought it would. But that's okay. I don't mind. You could all, it's 9:30 in the morning. I'm sure we can all use another coffee break, or a bathroom break, since your coffee is probably kicking in. But I want to take a moment just to answer questions or to hear comments. Like if anybody has anything they'd like to kind of express about the idea of integration through concepts or integration through skills, maybe something that you've an idea that you've done, or a question you have, or better understanding of one or the other. Because the prompt, I'm going to give you a prompt to consider during our break, and it's about concepts and skills. So I'm going to take a minute to answer any questions, and we'll all sit through weird Zoom wait time until somebody wants to speak. And just raise your hand, because you can't unmute yourselves. And hopefully Jeff can see you all. Oh, Anne, go ahead. Hold on, I gotta unmute you. Wait a minute, let me figure out how to do this. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Ask to unmute. Okay, give it a try. Oh.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
Good to see you, Eric.
You too.
Oh, sorry, that's the dog. I think we're okay. No, this is it's great information, Eric. I really like the way it's all, listed out. I mean, I've been in GT for a number of years, and this is just rich. I mean, there's so much here, and I think that what I imagine is not what I imagine. What I perceive is that teaching students, like introducing this language to the students, I think is important. And it seems like they seem like big concepts or big words or whatever terms, but they're so important, because then if they're familiar with the all these different aspects, then they can begin to grasp it. They can practice. And so that's well, I'm projecting now, but that's what I imagine. Maybe some classroom teachers might feel that challenge, like, when do I have time for this? But this is really my world, so I'm loving this, and very glad to be here.
Great. So good to see you, Anne. And the other thing too that reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up before we went on break was one of the reason that I wanted to think about this, and I picked skills and concepts as the integration idea, is because it's PK-12. I mean, you could absolutely talk about iteration or creating ideas with a kindergartner. My daughter's in 2nd grade, and she's constantly coming up with ideas. In fact, she won't stop. Of things she wants to do. And then we go through it, and it's a disaster, but we practice that iteration all the time. Or building a model of something, or asking questions, like all of those things. That was kind of the impetus behind why concepts and skills, because I do feel it is absolutely universal pre-K-12. But yeah, Karen, hold on, let me unmute you. Go for it. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Say that. Oh,
okay, there we go.
There you go.
Excuse me. One of the things that I'm seeing here, I'm taking a course at Maine Farmington right now with Dan Jackson, and it's basically patterns, functions, and changes. It's for my math certificate. And the textbooks that we're using are all these case studies about getting discussion topics, getting discussions going with to get students to make generalizations that they can apply to all mathematics as they go through, the end result that they are better at algebra, or being better prepared for algebra. And this is directly related to that. They go hand in hand, because this can be used for mathematics too. I just wanted to say that, because I'm seeing a very strong correlation with the inquiry and the questioning and the models and the representation, and being able to change your ideas and communicate that and being unafraid. And they're starting it in kindergarten, which is cool. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Karen. And I'm with you 100%. You know, as a middle school teacher, it was always very challenging for me to introduce the idea of, you know, working through failure, through ideation, through iteration when they're in 7th grade. And one of the things that I advocated for in the elementary school was like, look, I know you're all very, very busy, and that the science gets a half an hour or social studies gets a half an hour because they're so literacy and numeracy heavy, and that's fantastic. But allowing kids to be able to kind of plow through those things and fail at a younger age makes it easier as they get older and they move through their lives. But you are absolutely right, Karen, in that there's, you know, thinking about concepts, thinking about skills is disciplinary and interdisciplinary. It's 100% part of math. It's part of these things individually, and to consider, and that's not what this is, but to consider instructional design from a conceptual perspective. Now you're starting to really get deep into what kids can do with stuff and giving them opportunities for all sorts of other things. And then the generalization idea, just the next step of concepts is what are called generalizations or conceptual understandings, where you take two concepts from different disciplines or from the same discipline and put them together with a verb. That's like a conceptual understanding. It's also called a generalization. And those are like a way to divine, you know, an essential question for an investigation for your classroom. You know, but we're not going to get into all of that. That's a much bigger leap. But if you're interested, that'll be part of that concept course that we'll be talking about later. But yeah, this is 100%. If you can take this, use it just in your disciplinary area, or you can expand it out and do STEAM with it, or, you know, whatever you want to do. So thank you, Karen. That was great. What else? Anybody else got some questions? Comments? Story time? Oh yeah, go ahead, Ann. More the better. Should be able to
just listening to you and, you know, and Karen, what Karen was talking about, and looking at this list. Well, I'm only looking at the integrated skills list right now, but I can imagine, you know, giving students in the beginning of the year, you know, one of those large scale sketchbooks, and maybe printing this out, you know, this list out and these definitions, you know, in big type, so that they, you know, so with each maybe potentially unit or, you know, significant, well, I don't know, lesson, you know, they could go through and like make notes and brainstorm along the way, or, you know, record whatever their thoughts are. So have this be kind of like a working reference, you know, I like the idea of a sketchbook, because then they can draw if they want, or make lists or do whatever. And, you know, and put resources in there. So I really like this as just this list as a reference point for students to use, because the definition is right there, examples are right there too.
Yep.
So it could be interactive.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is just like, I mean, I put 6 on here because that was all that would fit on the slide and still be readable. Like, obviously there's the same with concepts. You know, we go back and look at the 7 concepts that are on here. Like, this is just a beginning point, right? And I would argue, Ann, you're right, with the skills. I would argue the same thing with the concepts, that you take this list or a list of concepts as skills, and keep them together. And as students work through, they can keep in mind like where they fall, like what fits underneath cause and effect, and why is it a skill and a concept? Like, that's a little weird to think about. And build off of that. Like, absolutely, put it up on your wall. Like, there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do with it. Cool. So the only other, I have one more thing I wanted to just mention real quick, and it's more about the idea of iteration than, and then we'll move on to take a break here for a second. One of the things that I've thought a lot about in iteration for me is, honestly, probably, I feel like one of the most important things that you can do in a classroom, giving kids the opportunity to do this. But if you think about iteration, the word itself it kind of falls underneath that like engineering perspective, right? Like, oh, you iterate when you prototype. It's an engineering thing, right? You do it in technology, you do it in engineering, you do it in those things. But I would argue that there really isn't that big of a difference between drafting your writing, doing multiple drafts of writing, and iteration, right? You're taking feedback and you're improving. You're taking feedback and you're improving. So I love this idea of iteration, but I love the idea of iteration being bigger than just engineering or bigger than just technology, because in the end, everything that students do that they get feedback on and then go back and improve, they're iterating. That's really what they're doing. And it was always a struggle for me. My ELA teacher was fantastic. Justin and I worked together. He was great. We had a really great relationship. And he would use vocabulary, and I would try to use the same vocabulary as him. But a lot of times, because I wanted there to be that consistency across what we were talking about, so every kid understood what I was saying when I said draft this, draft that, whatever it was. And we would have great discussions about this idea of like, well, why don't we call it iteration instead of drafts? Or why don't we call it iteration instead of fix your mistakes on your math quiz? Why don't we call it those things instead? And we had a great conversation, and then we all left and went our separate ways, and it never went anywhere. But just kind of a little seed to think about is, you know, that word iteration doesn't have to just fall into the engineering and technology world, because we're all iterating all the time. Like I iterated this slide deck. I'm iterating right now. Like we're doing on the regular. So we can use that word, kids become more comfortable with it, and now it's just a vocabulary word. Like Ann said, it's just a word that we use in our school as we iterate our work, because we want it to be, we iterate until it's ready to be published or until it's finalized to where it needs to be. So just a little side blurb about iteration to kind of kill 5 minutes. So let's take a break. I'm going to set the little fall timer here to 10 minutes so you can see how long we're at. Let's take a break. But while you're on your break, what I'd like you to do is think back to your STEAM orientation a minute ago, and which one, either skills or concepts, which one sits better with you and that you would use to drive your instruction. Now it can be both, obviously, but I want you to think about the one that really you lean hardest into. Are you leaning hard into skills, and that content is just the vehicle to teach those skills? Do you teach conceptually, where you think about the big idea, the big umbrella, like a system or a pattern, and you work underneath that big idea of a concept, either when you do your instructional design? Either way is fine. Obviously, there's no like right or wrong way to do this. But while we take a break, I just wanted you to consider that. Like, what one sits better with you in terms of your your pedagogy, your instructional design kind of ideas? Do you live in a skills world? Do you live in a concept world? If you do both, which one do you lean harder into, one or the other? Because we're going to come back, we're going to do a little poll, and then the rest of the time, you're going to be able to do some choosing based on whether or not you focus on skills or you focus on concepts, but you're not tied to that, but just to kind of help with the direction piece of it. So as I just said, we've thought about how to integrate skills or concepts. We're about split concepts and skills, which is fantastic, or a mixture of the two, which is 100% true, absolutely positive, 100%, do it up. But let's look at two ways that we can design these things, right? Because in the end, a STEAM activity that is all capital letters, requires some kind of finesse when it comes to instructional design. I picked two. There are lots of ways. In fact, both of the ones that we're going to talk about right here, the 5 E's in design thinking. If you're a backwards design person and you're like a Wiggins and Mateague, like to the end, like ride or die, and you're all about like backwards design, these things are set up to be that, to work with backwards design. I used the 5 E's and design thinking in my classroom and always did it design backwards. If you have another way that an instructional design model that works really well for you, absolutely keep it. I'm not, this is in no way an endorsement of either one of these things. These are just the two that I've had the most success with, and that juxtapose each other well enough that it can meet anybody anywhere. So these are absolutely instructional design models. That's the idea. If you, I don't know how you build your units, but these are two examples of ways you can do instructional design. We're going to start with looking at inquiry, because both the 5Es and design thinking, the way we've built them out, are driven by inquiry. But we should probably define inquiry first. So, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what inquiry is and what inquiry isn't. Now, I'm not going to read all of these. I'm just going to kind of hit some of the big ones. The difference between inquiry is structured. It doesn't have to be a free-for-all. I mean, it can be, but that's not the idea. Like, there's lots of ways to look at inquiry, and free-for-all is like the end one. The other one, that scaffolded with support, modeling, and guidance, the fourth one down. I feel like that's a really important thing to keep in mind about inquiry, because there is a misconception that it is discovery education. The students are just, it's like, straight up discovery. And that is not necessarily, discovery does have data that shows that that's not necessarily going to get the most bang for your buck. Inquiry is different than discovery. Inquiry is scaffolded. Inquiry is designed to be built out in a way that students are successful and can learn the content, the standards that you want them to learn, and apply them later on. But it isn't just everybody's left on their own to just do whatever they need to do and to figure it out. I'm not saying that model doesn't have value in some circumstances, but that's not what inquiry is. That is discovery education. The last one is that I want to point out, to kind of make a real point about, is the last one, that inquiry isn't, you just stop teaching, right? It is that kind of move from this like teacher to facilitator, absolutely. But there still has to be, like, we're still responsible for content. Like, there's no way around that. Like, we still have to abide to the Maine learning results. We're still responsible for those things. We still have testing to consider. We still have state and national testing to consider and prepare students for. Like, we're responsible for those things. And it is important that students have understanding of content. Like, I'm an interdisciplinary instruction specialist, but you can't have interdisciplinary without disciplines. So 100%, like, you need to have direct instruction, right? Or some sort of variation of direct instruction. And direct instruction doesn't mean stand up in front of the room and talk either. There are lots of models of direct instruction, and that's not why we're here. If you're interested in that, email me, we'll go over it together. But it is absolutely not, I just throw up my hands as a teacher and sit at my desk and read the newspaper. When I did my student teaching, the teacher that I worked with did that, but only because he made the kids do worksheets all day. That is not what this is. That's not the idea. Inquiry is not just yep, I'm gonna go get coffee. That's not what it is. So it absolutely does involve teachers in different aspects of the work. And the 5Es is a perfect example of where that falls in. The other part, before we get into the instructional design models, is this idea of this gradual release of inquiry. I made the mistake. I was going to grad school. I was more years into teaching than I should have known better, but I didn't. I tried it anyway, and without any sort of scaffolding, without any real kind of attempt at having students practice inquiry, we just tried a free inquiry. We just dove. I just threw them all in the deep end, like it was the 30s, and we were teaching kids how to swim. Like it was it was just, everybody go, you genius hour, go. Everybody, you'll be great, go. And it was such a disaster that my principal told me I could never do it again. That's how terrible it was. It was absolutely, like, maybe 4 kids out of 100 got it done well enough to actually grade. Like, it was an utter disaster. And as I was learning more and more about inquiry and getting a better grasp on what I was doing, I came across this image of the swimming pool. And then it all made sense to me. I didn't structure that out well enough that I could support kids. They got frustrated. I mean, sort of. They had a great time because there was, it was genius hours. So they could do whatever they wanted to. And that included like going and playing basketball for a half an hour because they were working on their jump shots. But I should have scaffolded that better and gradually released that control of learning. And I didn't. And this image is a perfect example of that. The structured inquiry is, if students have never done it before, that's the place to begin, right? Like the students are following the lead of the teacher. Everybody engages in the inquiry together. The teacher leads it, checks for understanding. The application, everybody does the same application. Everybody does the same thing. And then when students are used to that and have a better grasp on how that feels and how that works, and have developed those skills to be able to be successful with inquiry, then you can start to release a little bit and let them into the deeper end of the pool through controlled and guided inquiry. And those can look a lot of different ways too. It could be, you may give students the essential question and they develop their guiding questions. You may give them their essential questions and their guiding questions. You might, as a teacher, give them an essential question that's so broad that they can work in something that is relevant to them. Whatever that might be. And then they're developing their own guiding questions and they're developing their own they're applying as they go, but it fits underneath that content of whatever it is that you were trying to, whatever content you were trying to work through. It is such a, is such a challenge for students, especially if they've never done it before, to understand, especially for that kid who is like, and you all know this kid, that kid who is like, you tell me what you want and I will give you exactly what you asked for, right? You just tell me and I'll give it to you. I just want the A. I will give you exactly what you want. When that student gets into the situation of like, I want you to build me a car out of recycled materials that uses Newton's third law to move. There's no directions, right? There's none of that. Like it's just like build this thing, right? And go. And that's a struggle for every student, no matter what, unless they have had this opportunity to have that gradual release, right? So I find this image to be fantastic. Google it, steal it, take it. I don't care. Do whatever you want with it. Share it with your friends. Post it in the teacher's room. Do whatever you want. I don't care. But I feel like this is a really great example. And Michael, I agree with you. Like this is such a perfect way of describing inquiry and the importance of scaffolding it out. Because once you get through there, then you can do free inquiry in terms of a genius hour or 20% project or a passion project or something like that. Because they have those skills to be able to apply to that freedom that they now have with whatever they're doing. And just an aside, I totally did a genius hour again, but don't tell my admin. So let's move on and let's look at the 5 E's because we're going to start ourselves off. And what we're going to do, just kind of give it if you haven't looked through the rest of the slide deck yet, what we're going to do is I'm going to describe these 2 instructional design models, the 5E one and the design thinking one. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to give you all like 30 minutes to work through 2 exemplars that I developed. And we'll talk more about those later. But the idea being that I want you to look through those exemplars and look for where your connections would be, whether it be conceptual, skill-based, content-related, whatever it might be. We're going in that direction. But the way that I've built them out is that I wanted you to have some choice in what instructional model makes the most sense for you, right? Which one fits the best in your situation, 5 E's or design thinking. So there are 4 exemplars. 2 of them one's design thinking, one's 5 E's from a conceptual perspective, and one of them is 5 E's, and one of them is design thinking from a skills-based perspective. And of course, there's crossover because why wouldn't there be? But that's the idea. So I wanted you to kind of have a better, like I wanted to know where we're going with this so that this has some makes sense of why we're talking about it in the first place, because we're going to use these in a few minutes. So, so the first one is the 5 E's. The 5Es was designed by designed right after the next gen science standards came out. It is a science, it is technically a science instructional design model. I argue that it is universal. In fact, I've done plenty of PDs about how universal this is. One of my favorite ones that I do when we talk about inquiry and we talk about the 5Es directly is the essential question is a hot dog a sandwich, right? Like, and we use the 5Es to go through this. Like, it is universal for content. Everybody can use it. STEAM, of course, but everybody could use the 5Es because it makes a lot of sense in how it's designed. So it starts like this. There are 5 Es: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Hence the name. We'll go through each one of them real quick. Like I said, this isn't designed to be like let's dive into the 5Es, let's dive into design thinking, but we're just going to kind of do a real kind of broad overview of it. So you start with engage. And when you start with engage, you're starting with some sort of way of catching students' interest. And if you've used the 5Es before, feel free to take a nap for a minute. But it's the engage piece of this is like, how are we going to get kids vested, and how are we going to get kids asking questions about what it is we're doing? And that engage thing could be a lot of different things. So the example, for instance, of is a hot dog a sandwich is John Hodgman on Late Night with Stephen Colbert arguing with each other about whether it is or it isn't. It's just a video, and that's it. That's all it is. It can be an image. It could be a story. It could be a piece of text. It could be something anecdotal. It could be a person coming in and sharing an experience. The idea, though, is that you're hooking kids. You're connecting them to whatever it is you're going to be doing the rest of the way through. Then comes the explore phase. Exploration, and I'm going to preface this with scaffolded exploration, so that students can start to design their own ideas, right? They're starting to build their own understanding of whatever it is that you want them to have a grasp on. So if it's content related or skill related or conceptual, right? The idea is that they have the opportunity to explore it and start to build their own understandings of how that works. And then that's why the scaffolding comes in really well, and why inquiry is not discovery education. If you scaffold it well, every single kid, I'm going to take that back, not every kid, almost every kid will end explore with a relatively good understanding of what you want them to understand, right? They'll have a pretty good grasp of whatever concept or skill or both you want them to have, or content or topic or whatever. They'll almost all will have a good understanding of it. They'll develop it all on their own, if it's scaffolded well. And that's the difference between this kind of thing and discovery education, because discovery education, again, is fantastic in a lot of ways, but you don't always end up with people in the same place when they're done. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it doesn't matter. But that's the idea here. So we're giving students a scaffolded experience to be able to start developing their own understanding. And then we get to explain. And this is where the teacher comes in and plays a really big role in this. Because we got to make sure that every student has what they need to be able to do the next phase, which is elaborate, which is where we apply it to a new situation. But in order to do that, everybody has to be, or as close to everybody has to be, on the same page, have a good understanding of what it is they need to be able, what content they need, what skills they need, whatever they need to be able to apply next. So if you're thinking STEAM here, which again, we'll look at the exemplar in a moment, in that explore phase, you might do multiple iterations of explore and explain, because there might be multiple things that they need to have good understandings of and be able to articulate and apply in order to do the next part. So this, and I messed with this graphic a lot to try and get it to where I wanted it to be. But if you look on the bottom, here, I actually have a mouse here. That's why this arrow has two points on it, because I used to, when I taught using the 5Es, that was my instructional design model. I spent a lot of time here because I knew that in order to do the apply piece of this in here in the elaborate phase, everybody had to have everything they needed to be able to do this. So I would take whatever they were going to do, I would break it down into whatever content and skills I needed to be able to work through, And then we would just go back and forth, would explore and explain until we were ready to go, until we were ready to apply. And then even then, I still miss stuff because it's just the way it is. But this is where that falls in. Now, the explain phase can be a couple of different things. It could be just direct instruction. Absolutely. It could be opportunities. Part of explore could have students developing something that they then share with the class, like a jigsaw style type of protocol. It could be that all the kids are in doing different aspects of a concept and explore underneath like systems, for instance, and you're focusing on weather, and they're all kind of exploring different aspects of weather. But when it comes down to it, you need them to understand how precipitation works, right? That's really what you're down here for. So, that was where you make sure that everybody's good to go. That's the goal here. Explain is to make sure that everybody is set. We're all good. Everybody's ready to apply their learning. And then the next phase is elaborate, which is where they apply that content knowledge, those skills, those concepts, whatever it is that you're working through. That's where they apply them to some sort of unique situation. And there's a great book, and I think I'm going to do another book study this winter. The book's called Why Don't Students Like School? It's by this cognitive scientist named Daniel Willingham. And one of the things he talks about in that book is exactly this idea of application. So the story kind of goes, I'm going to paraphrase this, that he had a bunch of medical students were given a task. And the task was, I need you to figure out how to infiltrate this castle. And there's only one road in, and you need to be able to take this castle over and win the day. So students iterated, they worked through, they figured out, and eventually they figured out that if they had one group come up the main path, but then flanked around the outside, that they could take the castle. So it was like an indirect approach. Here's the attention, right? But we're going to come at it from multiple angles to be able to get to this. They then said to the students, okay, now, I'm going to ask you a new question. You have a tumor in a person, and you cannot directly irradiate it. You cannot just send, however that works, chemo directly to the tumor. It won't work. How are you going to solve this problem? And not a single one of them got to that answer. But the answer is exactly the same as the castle. You come at it with weaker points from multiple angles, and you attack the tumor that way. Not a single one of those kids could transfer the castle idea to the tumor idea. Not a one of them. By themselves, right? So that's where we fall into this part of this, is we can scaffold that. Students will never be able to just look at a new situation and just be like, oh yeah, I remember that from the other day. I can just apply this skill. They struggle with that, right? As they get older, they get better at it. But I mean, I know adults who can't do that. So we can scaffold that experience. But this is the goal, is by allowing students the opportunity to apply that learning to a unique situation, we build that out. We connect those concepts inside of their brains for them. And now, with the goal being anyway, that when they're faced with a situation, they have that way of thinking figured out. And that the context of the problem may be very different than what they learned it in, but they can apply and transfer that knowledge to solve that problem. That's the idea here. So that's the next part, is elaborate. Notice how evaluate is in the middle. If the picture was better, you would see that there are gray arrows pointed here and here and here. I don't know why they're not there, but they are actually there. Because the evaluate piece should be embedded throughout all of this process. It's a last E because there should be something at the end, some sort of evaluation process at the end, whether it's, it should be reflective, it should be feedback, it should be scoring, we have to score. Like that part comes at the end. But if you really think about it from an assessment perspective, the goal would be to formatively assess as you're traveling through all of these E's. That is the point, which is why I put evaluate in the middle. The traditional model of this has it just in one big circle like this, where the evaluate is just another one of the circles on the outside that would be blue like this. But I really feel passionately that evaluate should be all throughout every phase of this. So that way we know when we get to explain that everybody's good to go, that all the students are good to go. So that's the 5E instructional model from a 10,000 foot view. But I want to, before I go to design thinking, I want to answer any questions that anybody might have about this instructional model, or stories if you use it. I'd love to hear how, if you like it or not. Now the weird wait time. Okay, Anne. Hold on, let me unmute you. Oop, go for it.
I can't remember what it was, but I just heard on the radio, there were scientists talking about treating cancer growths, and basically it was something that somebody had noticed, like, well, it was something about when there's pressure on something, it explodes. Maybe it exploded, maybe it had to do with heat. But anyway, the idea is like making those connections, and that it's that, enough people in the room were able to think creatively and say, oh yeah, maybe we could try that with this. And they have maybe they needed to do more research to develop whatever that treatment was going to be. But the idea is like the noticing, and then like, oh, that's how that works there. Maybe it could work here. And so, yeah, that's what just this reminds me of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what else? I break the yeah, I think what was I going to say? Maybe it had to do with this. One of my biggest challenges is feeling like I need to have the gizmo or the app or access to whatever the latest thing is, so that students can do the exploration and then elaborate and then do that elaboration step. So that's my own personal narrative. I don't know that I realize that that's not always true. But anyway, that's what kind of is always spinning in my head about how can I, here I am in little old Northport in this little school, So anyway, there's more to that, but.
Well, absolutely. And I think like that makes me think of like two things that are, one of them is a struggle for explore, because you're right. In order for students to be able to explore, there has to be something for them to explore, right? They can absolutely just research. Research is a great solution to that, 100%, absolutely. But like one of my big things for explore in my classroom was we used a lot of simulations, but we used gizmos, but it's like $4,000 a year. Like it is ridiculously overpriced. Like FET, like all those things are free and they're great. And don't get me wrong, they're fantastic. But you're right, there is that need, that feel of like, I want kids to do authentic research on this, or I want kids to have an authentic data collection. Let's find some sort of way to be able to do that. So I absolutely get what you're saying. And the part is figuring out like, how can we do this on a budget with what we have in our classroom or whatever it is, and get the best data we can. The other thing I was thinking about too was about computational thinking, and how when that phrase is used really only in the computer science world, and primarily in the computer science world, the idea of computational thinking. And in the end, when you think about it, it's just being able to like logically solve a problem, and that's kind of the gist of it. So you can use computational thinking without technology at all. Like you can absolutely do that, which is an interesting idea, because like I said, like computational thinking kind of lives in that computer science world, which then means you're coding or you're doing whatever. But again, to kind of connect that back up to explore, if you don't have the stuff, you do the best you can, right? Like solve problems however way you want to, if you can. Do you have more, Anne? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I was also thinking about that that book that came out a couple years back. You might have told me about it. It's called Dear Data. But it's
yeah.
basically this exchange of
Yeah.
postcards with these two scientists who just had this friendly exchange, right? And they were collecting, they expressed data, they recorded data with these little graphics that they were just making up and sending these postcards. And so I'm just reminded of that it's what you're talking about, like that type of thinking, but it's also an approach that can be accessible. Students can, make it personal, have that that relevance, but it's the practice of for example, recording data, sharing data, that the organizational computational thinking in that, it can, I don't know, there's lots of possibilities. So
absolutely. Yeah, that is Dear Data. If you're a nerd, Dear Data is it's such a cool book. I have it at home. It's so great. I give it to all my mathy friends, all my sciencey friends. Everybody who loves like data visualization is such a neat book. So cool, so cool. But you're right. And one of the things that I feel like I struggled with at the beginning with thinking about STEAM from that 5Es instructional design model was where my weaknesses were when it came to, especially in data gathering. My background is math, my background is science, but like, how do you teach kids to design reliable data collection, right? Like, how do you go through that process in a way that makes the most sense to them without diving into being like, well, I guess you can't really ask anybody because it's never going to be a good data set. But like, how do we move through that? And I struggle with that at the very beginning, and we would practice with like counting squirrels and stuff, because it's like, how do you tell if you're not looking at the same squirrel twice? So I agree. Like, there are definitely some challenges that come along with that. But it does really kind of speak to that computational thinking piece. All right, so we move on to design thinking, unless anybody else has any questions about that. So I don't know if you've ever read the book Launch by John Spencer. It's a great book. We are in the process actually of working through some asynchronous PD that's we're calling MAP, which is pathway project, basically. And one of the pathways to kind of work through is the one we just talked about with inquiry and the 5Es. And then the other one is this design thinking model. Now, we couldn't steal John Spencer's Launch, so we developed our own. And this is what we came up with, proprietary and all that stuff. So this is what we came up with. And this, again, there's a deeper dives for both of these coming soon if you're interested in learning more about them. But the idea of design thinking is really focuses on students creating empathy to solve the problem that somebody might be having, right? That's really what design thinking is all about. It really is about understanding and empathizing, right? That's the goal. That's what sets design thinking off from other things, is that this is all about like, I have a relationship with this thing and I want to help solve this problem, whatever it might be. And I feel passionate about this because I have that personal connection to it. And it is very different. That's why I use these both as kind of to juxtapose each other, because it is significantly different than the 5Es in that it's designed differently. Still led by inquiry, still application of learning, 100%, still supports STEAM integration all the way through. But it is a very different model, an empathy-driven model. So the way it works is we start with that challenging problem or question. So similar to what you would start like the 5Es with, is where are we going to start this off? So kids need something to kind of get them to begin with. And that challenging problem or question could be anything. And we use challenging problem or question because problem denotes something that you can fix and is concrete. But in order to be able to kind of make this a little bit broader, we could also ask a challenging question that is more philosophical, or maybe isn't something that we can apply to, actually like build in real life to be able to do. Maybe it is a more of a literature question or something like that, right? Something that we may not be able to necessarily do anything about, but that we can still talk about, work our way through, and develop empathy, develop an understanding, ideate and iterate through the writing process, right, and then share with some sort of audience. So that's why those two are there, because a problem is something that kind of by definition means we could solve it. A question could be much more abstract, and we want to make sure we hit both of those things. It's open-ended, right? Connects to either that STEAM concept or skill. So you start with that, and then from there, students, and again, teachers, we scaffold this experience. This isn't just a discovery education model. To start to do that understanding and empathizing. Empathy, developing empathy can happen in a lot of ways. You can do empathy mapping. You can do interviewing. There's all sorts of ways that you can develop empathy. But the idea is that students are developing the empathy and the understanding together and building, right? That's the idea. So I'm not only am I learning more about this, but I'm learning the impact that this is having on this specific group of people, this specific person, this group of animals, whatever. That's the second part of this. We start with the problem, whatever it is, or the question, and then students then dive into understanding it and empathizing with it. Then we ideate and iterate. So, and those are separate things. Ideation comes first. Then when you're ready to start prototyping, then iteration comes in. So you ideate potential solutions or answers to the question, and then iterate their solution or iterate your answer, whatever it might be. So, we go through that. So we've got that empathy there. So you work through the iterate, and then the last part of this is that the problem, the answer, whatever it is shared, right? Now, 5Es has a sharing aspect of it as well, some sort of authentic audience, but design thinking really is designed to be shared with the person that's the problem's that you're trying to solve for, right? It is person generated, human centered. That is the real big piece of design thinking. So the end part of this is really focused on how do we share this with somebody who can do something with it. So, for instance, you do a big thing, and in the end, you're going to share it. And that sharing could very well be like a fair type setup where everybody puts their trifolds in the gym, parents come, they walk through. That can be part of that. But really the other piece of that part of that is they're sharing with somebody who can actually do something about it, whether it's digitally or in person. So the students have designed this or answered this question or designed this solution to this problem, and then they give it to somebody. They share it with a local lake association. They share it with scientists somewhere. They share it with the town office. Like they share it with the selectmen. Like they do something with it, right? They send it to the town council. Like they present it to somebody who can actually make some switch and actually put this into practice if they decided to, right? So that is where this model deviates a little bit from the others. Could you do that in the 5Es? Of course you can. Is that part of elaborate? It absolutely can be, 100%. But design thinking really is, because it's human-centered, is designed to be implemented. It's designed to be put into practice in some way to be able to help the world or to help somebody or to help a group of people do whatever it is that they need to do, whatever that might be. And it doesn't have to be like, well, we need to put in like a wheelchair ramp. And that's a fantastic idea if you don't have one, and that's what students want to work on. Absolutely. But it could also be like, we need some place for kids to hang out after school because they're getting in trouble. Or we need a place, we need to figure out how to, we have too much waste in our school. Or there's an epidemic of loneliness. How can we make a difference in that, right? Like, and really understanding that problem and then designing the solution and then putting it in place and doing something with it. So the share has kind of two aspects to it, because we do want to show off to parents, right? We want kids to feel successful. We want parents, we want adults from the community to feel like they could come in and explore whatever students are working on. I feel like there's absolutely a place for that, 100%. But that is along with that sharing with that authentic audience, that person, that group who could do something with that. And that's what separates this from other things, is that is almost a requirement of design thinking in a way. So this is much easier, this shorter, but much broader in terms of instructional design. But before we go on to the next piece of this, I just want any questions or comments or thoughts about design thinking as an instructional model, or have used it. I've always been curious about what people have used design thinking a lot, or if thought about it but never did it in practice. Oh, all right, Anne, you got me right as I was about to say we're all done. Perfect. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think, Eric, you and I were in communication at that time, or maybe it was just after, but I've definitely leaned in on industrial design and design thinking. When, for example, when we were looking at how to use the 3D printer, and I had students thinking about natural design, and then how could they incorporate that into a product, and there was such great learning, because I think we did a 3D printing. It was like thinking about a candle, some kind of candle holder, but we realized that if we created panels, they could create a box, and the panels could have that, that natural design. But anyway, it was just that was a way. So there was discovery through the whole process. So there was the discovery and the product, and we realized, there are several things that we didn't know. So, and I was learning about the 3D printer, and then I think it was Tinkercad, and I'm still no expert at all. But anyway, that's what comes to mind. So
Absolutely.
so I have a background in art, so I love, this kind of stuff. But I thought you told me, I shared that product thing. I thought you told me about that. Wasn't there that story of there was a student, I feel like.
Oh yeah.
In Camden, maybe, or someplace.
It was,
and then that product became like a legitimate product.
It was in Nokomis, and it was they had a robot with an iPad on the top of it for a kid who couldn't come to school because they were immunocompromised, and they came to school on this little robot with an iPad on the top of it, and they just traveled through their day like they would if they were just a student, moving their way through. Yeah, there's a video on it somewhere online. It's wicked cool. All right, so let's go on to this next piece, because one of the things that I really feel is important is that we talk about these two are very, very different. Like I said, they very much juxtapose each other, but they do have a lot in common as well. And what I want to do is just take a minute before we kind of dive into this next piece to look at where they're strong and some things that we should probably consider when for both of these models. Okay, so the 5Es, they both center on application. That is their ultimate goal of both of these instructional models, is application of learning. You design the content, the students get an understanding of what they're doing. They might be empathizing, they might be exploring, or they might be doing a little bit of both. And then they're applying that learning, or they're transferring that learning to a new situation. They both are inquiry driven, whereas design thinking involves, perhaps could involve a little more creativity, innovation, and iteration than the 5Es would. I'm not saying that the 5Es can't, but design thinking is built that way. The 5Es is really clearly modeled It's like nice, easy steps, like follow this, follow this, follow this. Whereas design thinking is a little bit broader and has that focus on empathy rather than the focus on um, concepts or skills. So those two are different in that way, but very, strengths in either one of those things. The 5Es is really fantastic at supporting that scaffolding, whereas design thinking is much better, much stronger at building student agency and ownership. And honestly, I think the 5Es can as well, but like that agency and ownership comes from that empathy. So that's where the 5Es is stronger. The 5Es is also great. One of the things I really love about the 5Es is you could use it just as a lesson plan, or you could use it for a unit model. Either way is great because it works really well. But some things to consider about both of these is like the 5Es is very linear, and that sometimes can be a challenge when thinking about STEAM, because STEAM can be very much led by creativity. In fact, I keep plugging our PDs coming up, but one of the things that we have coming up in, I think, beginning of November is a creativity-driven STEAM cohort. We're working with a group called Creative Generation out of South Portland that is going to lead us through their like very cool creativity assessment that kind of gives you this thing, and there's going to be a ton of support. It's really, really cool. Since we're in a STEAM thing, I would be remiss not to mention that. It is going to be really neat. I'm very excited about it. My supervisor, Kathy, and I are going to take the lead on this one, along with some folks from LTT, from the MLTI program, like Learning Through Technology. So it's going to be really, really cool. We're just like, we're in the contract phase now. So it's going to be very, very neat. So keep an eye out to Newsroom or our newsletter for updates on that. But we won't be using the 5Es because the 5Es as an instructional model is very linear, which I liked. We're going to be using the design thinking model for that cohort, because if we're going to lead with creativity, the 5Es allows that to really kind of flourish. And again, not that it can't in the 5E model, but design thinking kind of lends itself well to that. But when it comes to design thinking, if you need that structure in terms of instructional design, this is not, like, design thinking is a bit more challenging. But one of the things we're working on is trying to make it more of a framework so that it is more, not linear, but more user-friendly in terms of planning. So the 5Es, less emphasis on that human-centered problem solving, right? Requires very intentional planning if you want it to be like STEAM focused and not just like a science lesson, because that's what it was designed for, was for science. So it does require that intentional planning. Design thinking, some things to consider about design thinking is that it takes a long time and it requires some interesting resources like we don't use that word anymore. Like community members, people who can come in, experts, people who can come in and tell their stories about whatever it is that they're doing, so that you can really develop that empathy. And it requires that intentional planning, because it's easy to get off task it's easy to get off your target and go down a road that you didn't necessarily mean to with design thinking. Just some things to consider as you're going through this. But we're going to take another break because it's almost 10 and I've been talking for a long time and you've been sitting for a long time. So here's what I'd like you to do. Take your break. I'll do the same thing as I did before. I won't let the timer run. I'll spend 5 minutes on the design thinking model, and I'll spend 5 minutes on the 5E model. I think that'll be helpful. And what I want you to do is think about which one of those resonates with you. Which one do you kind of lean hard into? And you just mentioned like the instructional design, the design thinking aspect of things is something you've worked hard that you kind of leaned into in your past. That's great. But now that we have both of those models, which one kind of resonates with you? Because not that you have to, but again, like I said before, we're going to use these models for our next piece. So the last thing we're going to do today, and just full disclosure, this isn't the last slides. There's a lot more here, but we'll get to that at the end. But for the last thing we're going to do for our time today is I want to take the time to look at some examples and try to make connections between what you do and the examples that I've set out for us to work in. Now, I'm gonna send it right now. Boop. I just put in the chat, but also on the page, there are 4 hyperlinks to 4 Google Docs. You all have commenting access. And what I'd like you to do is use the comment tool to add your thoughts. Pick 2. Whatever 2 instructional models worked, what made sense to you, whether it was concepts or skills. I have examples for both of those. And pick 2 of them. Pick 2 instructional, pick either both 5 E's and look at it from a concept and skill perspective. Pick a concept from the 5 E's and a concept for design thinking. Whatever 2 make the most sense to you, whatever 2 you resonate with the most. Pick 2 and go through them and just read the instructional design, read the unit. It is intentionally vague. Like, you probably won't see a lot of content in there. Like, that was the point. They're intentionally vague. They are intentionally do not include lesson plans and daily activities and all that kind of stuff, because this is just a shell, with the goal being where you can find connections. And the overall purpose of this is to be a resource for all of you when you leave. I want you to be able to leave with something that might be useful for you. If it's not, then there's a little X on the top right-hand side. You just click it and it goes away. Then you don't have to worry about it anymore. But if it is useful to you, then bookmark it and keep it handy and use it as a resource if you so desire, okay? But as a group of people, we're smarter together, right, than we are individually. So this is an opportunity for us to be able to spend some time and just kind of add our own perspectives into where we see ourselves in each of these exemplars, okay? The rest of the slide deck we're not going to have time for, and I didn't expect that we would. I expected we would end right about here. But the last piece of this that I had talked about in the description, I wanted to make sure that I had included some information about for anybody that was interested, is on assessment. And because assessing these things can be rather challenging. And like I said, I don't have time to get into it today, so I apologize for that part of it. But what I did was I built out the slides for this to be relatively straightforward as a resources. It really doesn't require me to talk about it. You can kind of go through it on your own and kind of get an idea of the different aspects of assessment that might be useful for you. This focuses mostly on these things called performance tasks, which are, well, you can read about it. I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time. And I want you guys all to go to lunch. And then there's a piece about rubrics and some different types of rubrics. And then a whole slide on things to consider as you're scoring stuff. So those are all there. And I want to make sure you knew they were there to as a resource as you move forward. Because like I said, basically I had time. So the second to last slide on here is all of our interdisciplinary instruction resources. Like I said, we're going to have some learning experiences coming up. There's going to be some pathways around design thinking, concept-based instruction, the 5 E's, and inquiry, teaching with transfer, some focus on modern literacies, and then the question formulation technique, which is out in our newsroom now. If you follow this link, you'll well, as soon as the web edit gets accepted, the web page that will be there will be our professional learning schedule, which is where I tend to put all these things. So if you're interested in resources as they come up, our professional learning schedule is updated on the regular. So, and I keep putting them there, as well as our II newsletter right here. This link will take you to sign up for our newsletter, which is also where we post a lot of the opportunities that are coming up at the DOE, but also just on the interdisciplinary team. We also have some hubs here if you're interested in learning more about STEAM, literacy, civics, and numeracy. There's an arts and humanities hub coming soon. These are our pages. You're welcome to go to those at your leisure and explore. We have some really great asynchronous resources for folks if you're interested. Our professional learning page, has a lot of resources on a variety of different instructional design, but pedagogical, neuroscience, questions, all sorts of stuff. It's all there. It's some really great things there. So that's me. Feel free to email me anytime, and I will be happy to connect with you and talk STEAM or instructional design or any other aspect of school that you want to talk about.